Hello everyone, my name is Justenia Pino, and today I'll be talking to you about President John F. Kennedy. President John F. Kennedy was born on May 29, 1917. He died November 22, 1963. He was very often referred to by his initials JFK. He was an American politician who served as the 35th President of the United States from 1961 until his assassination in 1963. John F. Kennedy was born into a rich, politically connected Boston family of Irish Catholics. Born soon after America's entry into the First World War, John Fitzgerald Kennedy was the nation's first president born in the 20th century. During his childhood and youth, Kennedy suffered frequent serious illnesses. Nevertheless, he strove to make his own way, writing a best-selling book while still in college at Harvard University and volunteering for hazardous combat duty in the Pacific during World War II. He later on married Jacqueline Onassis from 1953 to 1963. Together, they had three children, John F. Kennedy Jr., Carolyn Kennedy, and Patrick Bouvier Kennedy. Kennedy was the youngest person elected U.S. president. Kennedy entered politics, serving in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1947 to 1953 and the U.S. Senate from 1953 to 1961. Kennedy represented Massachusetts in both houses of the U.S. Congress prior to becoming president. After Kennedy graduated from Harvard, the United States entered World War II. His efforts to join the U.S. Navy were initially thwarted by his ill health. However, his father intervened. He was eventually admitted and assigned to serve in the South Pacific, commanding a small motor torpedo boat, or PT boat. Kennedy and his crew participated in the campaign to wrest thousands of islands from Japanese control. In August 1943, as the sailors were sleeping without posting a watch, a Japanese destroyer rammed his boat, PT-109. Widely credited with the rescue of his crew, Kennedy received the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps Medal for valor and a Purple Heart for injuries he sustained. For many observers, his presidency came to represent the ascendance of youthful idealism in the aftermath of World War II. Presidential televised debates. Kennedy faced two great hurdles in his quest for the White House: his youth and his religion. Polls revealed that many Americans balked at the prospect of such a young man untested on the world stage, leading the nation at a time of threatening Cold War peril. Especially after Dwight Eisenhower, who projected a comforting grandfatherly image. For Nixon, although he was only 4 years older than Kennedy, the issue was less acute, since he had the advantage of having served as vice president for the duration of Eisenhower's 2 terms, and was therefore a more familiar face. In order to overcome Nixon's advantage in public recognition, Kennedy challenged Nixon to a series of televised debates. Nixon, an experienced debater, accepted. The series of debates between the two candidates became the first extensive use of what would thereafter become a staple medium of American political campaigns: television.
The 1960 campaign introduced something new in presidential elections: face-to-face debate. The two met and discussed the issues on nationwide television in 4 separate hour-long telecasts. They reached a vast audience of millions. Never before had a U.S. electorate had such an opportunity to compare the candidates. Nixon stressed his experience and the Eisenhower administration record. Kennedy emphasized need for improvement and new leadership. The much-discussed religious question was an unknown factor.
Born in the 20th century, pitting the 47-year-old Republican Vice President Richard M. Nixon against the 43-year-old Democratic challenger John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy narrowly won the 1960 presidential election against Richard Nixon by carefully cultivating the news media and crafting an effective public image. Once in office, Kennedy prioritized domestic economic growth, cutting taxes, and boosting federal spending.
When the voters went to the polls on November 8th, they gave Kennedy the victory by one of the closest margins in history. Nixon finally conceded after noon the following day. The new president-elect went from his Cape Cod home to the Armory in Hyannisport, Massachusetts, to make his victory statement.
Americans, I say that the next 4 years are going to be difficult and challenging years for us all. The election may have been a close one, but I think that there is general agreement by all of our citizens that a supreme national effort will be needed in the years ahead to move this country safely through the 1960s.
Kennedy's family worked hard throughout the campaign for the victory, and all were on hand to help him celebrate.
John F. Kennedy becomes president. On a cold January 20, 1961, John F. Kennedy took the oath of office. After such a close campaign, Kennedy knew his inaugural address would have to reach out to his opponents. Domestic affairs. To stimulate the economy, Kennedy pursued legislation to lower taxes, protect the unemployed, increase the minimum wage, and energize the businesses and housing sectors. Kennedy believed these measures would launch an economic boom that would last until the late 1960s. The president also proposed new social programs including federal aid to education, medical care for the elderly, urban mass transit, a Department of Urban Affairs, and regional development and alopecia. Lacking deep congressional support, however, Kennedy's programs encountered resistance. He did manage an increase in the minimum wage, but a major medical program for the elderly went nowhere. Foreign affairs. The Bay of Pigs. It was Cuba, however, that was the site of an immediate crisis, largely of the administration's own making. Kennedy had only been in office 2 months when he ordered the implementation of a covert CIA plan inherited from the Eisenhower administration. In the early hours of April 17, 1961, approximately 1,500 anti-Castro Cuban refugees landed at the Bahia de Cochinos, Bay of Pigs, on Cuba's southern coast. Iron Curtain. Still recovering from this humiliating political defeats, Kennedy met with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev in Vilna in June 1961. In a dramatic move 2 months later, in mid-August 1961, the Soviets and East Germans constructed a wall separating East and West Berlin, providing the Cold War with its most tangible incarnation of the Iron Curtain. To the moon. Kennedy was always instrumental in the success of the nation's space program. He vowed to have Americans on the moon by the end of the decade. Kennedy would not live to see the landing of a man on the moon in July 1969. Peace Corps. President Kennedy created the Peace Corps by executive order in 1961, a recreation to both the growing spirit of activism throughout the West and communist efforts to capitalize on the colonization process. Shortly after Congress formally endorsed the Peace Corps by making it a permanent program, the first volunteers went aboard to teach English in Ghana. Contingents of aid workers soon followed to Tanzania and India. The program proved enduring. By the end of the 20th century, the Peace Corps has sent more than 170,000 Americans volunteer to over 135 nations.
On July 16, 1969, at 9:32 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Apollo 11 lifted off to begin the lunar landing mission. Eight days later, the command module with its precious cargo of men, recordings, films, and lunar specimens would splash down in the Pacific. At the post-recovery briefing, George Miller would capture the significance of the mission, its challenge, and its promise for mankind. Let us listen as we view highlights from those 8 days, photographed and brought back to us by the 3 astronauts. On July 6th,
John F. Kennedy's greatest achievement. Just months before his death, Kennedy secured an agreement with Britain and the Soviet Union to limit the testing of nuclear weapons in space, underwater, and in the Earth's atmosphere. Not only did it seek to reduce hazardous nuclear fallout, it also signaled the success of Kennedy's efforts to engage the Soviet Union in constructive negotiations and reduce Cold War tensions, a goal captured most famously in his June 1963 remarks at American University. In the wake of the close call over Cuba, Kennedy considered this agreement his greatest accomplishment as president. Assassination. On November 22, 1963, President Kennedy and the First Lady journeyed to Dallas on a campaign trip. Accompanying the Kennedys in the motorcade through the city were Democratic Governor John Connally and his wife Nellie. Governor Connally was hit. President Kennedy, who was shot twice and was mortally wounded. Kennedy was rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital, where he died soon thereafter. Bureau. On November 24, 1963, hundreds of thousands of people filled past Kennedy's coffin in the rotunda of the Capitol. Kennedy was buried the next day in a state funeral at Arlington Cemetery. Representatives from 92 nations attended the services, and an estimated 1 million people lined the streets of Washington, D.C. to observe the funeral procession. But for many Americans, the murder of John F. Kennedy would remain one of the most wrenching public events of their lives.
We shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to assure the survival and the success of liberty. Every thoughtful citizen who despairs of war and wishes to bring peace should begin by looking inward, by examining his own attitude towards the possibilities of peace. Too many of us think it is impossible. Too many think it is unreal. But that is a dangerous, defeatist belief. It leads to the conclusion that war is inevitable, that mankind is doomed, that we are gripped by forces we cannot control. We need not accept that view. Our problems are man-made, therefore they can be solved by man, and man can be as big as he wants. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Man's reason and spirit have often solved the seemingly unsolvable, and we believe they can do it again. Surely the opening vistas of space promise high costs and hardships, as well as high reward. So it is not surprising that some would have us stay where we are a little longer, to rest, to wait. But this city of Houston, this state of Texas, this country of the United States was not built by those who waited and rested and wished to look behind them. This country was conquered by those who move forward, and so will space. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas. The first reports say that President Kennedy has been seriously wounded by this shooting. The flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
There's only one word to describe the picture here, and that's grief.
What was it that moved this nation so much?
It's youth, grace, beauty, hope, promise. As history goes on, it will stay a very prominent part of its history. It's never going to fade. It is never going to fade.